America is an irradiated wasteland. Within it lies a city. Outside the boundary walls, a desert. The cursed earth. 800 million people living in the ruin of the old world. And the megastructures of the new one. Mega blocks. Mega highways. Mega City 1. Only one thing fighting for order in the chaos. The men and women of the Hall of Justice. Juries. Executioners. Judges.
Good evening, everyone. Back again with another review. Jay Saki here. Giles, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty okay.
I think tonight we are going to be talking about maybe one of the greatest films ever made. There's Citizen Kane, Gone with the Wind, Taxi Driver, The Godfather, Schindler's List, and then in the year 2012, we got Dredd. How much do you like this movie?
I really like this movie. I don't think it is like the best film ever made, but what I think it is a very, very competently executed film. I think it hits all the right notes when it needs to. Very well acted, great special effects, all that stuff. Very, very good. And being a fan of Judge Dredd for the longest time, I really do like this interpretation of Dredd. It's a bit different from the comics, but for what it is a very good interpretation, especially for audiences that are not familiar with the comics.
Alright, I would like to add to that I know very little about the Judge Dredd comic. I was considering doing a little bit of research ahead of time to inform myself, but I thought, you know what? Don't do the research. Just go off what you know. I'll let you be the Judge Dredd expert. I'll just say, as someone who knows very little about the comic at least, this film was very, very, very effective for me. Even though, I agree with everything you said. You're like, I think you said just now it's not the greatest film ever, but it's so great in execution, very effective. And I agree with all that, but the more I've watched it, the more I am kind of like, maybe it is the greatest film ever made. I have those films that I say are my favorite films, and then, you don't always watch your favorite films as much as you say you do. Then there's other movies where you repeatedly watch it again and again and again, and Dredd is just one of those movies. I just need to make clear to the audience, I love this movie. I've watched it so many times. And I don't think it's just, I don't think it's just me. I think it is a really, really great movie.
I think it's a very, very good movie, especially for, the budget it had, especially for all the things that were potentially going against it. I think it's a bit of a crime it's not as successful as it should have been, but that really came down to very poor advertising by the studio.
Yeah, I think I saw trailers for this film back in the day, and I was like, whatever. It just looked like another generic action sci-fi movie, like probably a lot of things that were advertised at the time. And I just, I didn't have any incentive to see it. But then it was much later my history would be that I think, making dinner for myself in my apartment in Franklin, Pennsylvania, and I needed something to watch with dinner, and I think it was free on Amazon at the time, and I was like, whatever, I'll just click on this, expecting that I was gonna shut it off after 20 minutes or something, and then I'm like, oh shoot, this is good. Then I think I had to be someplace, and I was like, darn, I had to stop the film and return to it later. But I remember thinking wow, that was really good. And then as the years went on, I always found myself returning to it. I would always return to that movie every year, every couple of years. It never got old. Okay, so we're probably getting too ahead of ourselves, as we do. The point I think we want to make clear to our audience is we love this movie.
It is a very, very good movie, and unlike a lot of comic book movies, you don't need to know about the comic book to enjoy this movie.
Yeah, and I definitely want to learn more about the comic book. And from what little I researched, I feel upset that that this movie wasn't better. I mean, that it didn't do better in theaters because I wanted to see them go in different directions with the lore from the comic. When did you see this film?
I actually saw it when it came out.
You saw it in theaters?
Yes, I saw it in theaters, and I instantly wanted to get it right after because, like I said, I've been a Judge Dredd fan and a fan of the 2000 AD magazine, which is where Judge Dredd pops up, which is done by Rebellion Comics. You know, growing up in the UK, it is a UK comic and was a lot more readily available than DC and Marvel, and was a lot more heavily pushed because it was a UK comic, despite the fact that it's set in the former United States. So I was keeping up with the news and so on, and I got to see it, and I was incredibly surprised that it wasn't advertised as heavily as it should have been. There are three major things that were against the film. First of all, is the first iteration of the movie with Sylvester Stallone that wasn't particularly great, and that's the thing people remember about the Dredd movie. Then you have the poor advertising, and then you have the fact that it is based off a rather niche British comic that doesn't have a lot of worldwide influence. So I was lucky to know about it just by the fact that I was a fan of the magazine and a fan of the comics, and that's how I learned about it. If I wasn't, I don't know if I'd even know of its existence.
Yeah, like I only had a tacit relationship with the comic. Yeah, it just wasn't on my radar. It just could have been an average, terrible movie as far as I was concerned at the time. But I was glad I watched it later. 'Cause I'm sure the audience is wondering, so what's this film, about? And over the years, I've told people about this movie to watch it, and anytime I've tried to come up with an explanation for it, like, oh, you should watch Dredd. It's about, and I always say something that doesn't do the movie justice. Basically, if I were to go quick, I would say it's a buddy cop film in a sci-fi futuristic setting where two cops are fighting the mob inside a big skyscraper. But that would obviously be very reductive to just explain it like that. Or I could be like, well, it's a post-nuclear apocalyptic future where society has been rebuilt and crime is gone crazy, and they have these guys called judges who are judge, jury, and executioner. They're the police and they just carry out on-the-spot sentencing. And then at that point, I'm now explaining too much. Is there any quick summary of this film? This separating the comic, okay. Yes, it's technically based on a comic, but you don't need to have read that to have enjoyed this film. How could you quickly tell someone, like if somebody were to say, oh, why should I watch this Dredd film? What is this incredibly amazing Dredd film that everyone keeps talking about? How would you even begin to describe it?
If I had to explain it to someone who didn't know anything about it, separating it from the comic, which does give a lot of backstory about why the world is the way it is a action crime thriller set in a post-apocalyptic world where two competing aggressive ideologies, which is an almost fascist police state, fights against a violent anarchistic crime syndicate. And that's a really difficult explanation to give to just like the general film goer. I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence, but that's a lot of buzzwords.
It is. I think if I had to be pretentious about it, I would say the movie is about grace shining through in the bleakest of times. Well, okay, I'm not being pretentious because I do believe that. I do believe that's why I like the movie a lot, because it's not just like this movie could have just been like a generic action thriller that you watch once starring Gerard Butler, but it's not. It's like better than that. It's elevated art. This movie is elevated beyond a lot of action movies. I do think the movie has depth to it. So yes, for me, it's a story about grace in the bleakest of times. Go see it.
I have a really difficult time with that explanation, knowing what Judge Dredd is, because it is the megacities which is where this is set, it is basically a city that encompasses the entire east coast of the United States. The America just doesn't exist anymore. There are 3 big cities in America, and that's all that's basically left of the population outside of hangers-on in the nuclear wasteland that is outside. And I'm already getting too technical. The reason why I'm saying this is recently Grace, under all this thing, the judges and the system they uphold is not really a nice thing. It totally removes due process. It allows on-the-spot execution. It doesn't take into account mitigating factors. It was originally a band-aid to fix a horrific crime problem, and it never went away.
Yes, but even with this very harsh, bad system, people still have to make moral choices. All right, so I think for the audience, basically a little bit of setup is to reiterate some of what we've been saying and more. The story is, yes, post-apocalyptic future, there's been nuclear war, but like civilization has been rebuilt, and, crime has gotten so bad that this new police force, who they just call judges, drive around, they have on-the-spot sentencing, they see a crime, they're like, you are being charged with this crime, how do you plead? Guilty, not guilty, you may go to prison for the rest of your life, or I could execute you right now, kind of a deal. Just the judges just going around, doing their thing, and that's your reality. And then, okay, there's a new judge named Judge Anderson, and she's having her first day on the job, and Dredd, she's shadowing with Dredd basically, and they get a call to go to this giant skyscraper building that's just full of apartments. They go there to investigate one crime, and then investigating that crime leads to them potentially finding evidence against a giant crime syndicate that has taken over that entire building. And then the crime syndicate is trying to stop them, and then it's just a great big, battle essentially inside the skyscraper, which sounds really dumb and reductive, but it's the best of its kind in terms of what it's doing. Which I think brings us to the question, so why though? Why do we like this movie so much? And I have a few notes as to why we like this movie and why it is better than your average action movie that was coming out at that time or has come out since then. So if I may, one reason why I love this movie, or I think this is a reason, is it treats you like an adult. Does that sound fair to you?
I guess you could say it doesn't baby you, and it doesn't preach to you either. It just presents its morality and its structure without apology.
I could not have said it better myself. Because, the movie doesn't have to... It's obvious from the start that this is a very repressive society, and it's probably perpetuating its own problems, but the movie doesn't, it doesn't baby you. It's not always trying to be like, now remember everyone, the police should never have this much power. It's obvious. But it is the society you live in, and it's the society you have to work with. So yeah, there is a very much, and I think today, if they made the movie, they would constantly be having to put up little reminders and safeguards for the audience to, don't believe too much in this society. Don't think Judge Dredd is too much of a hero. Remember, police brutality, that's a real thing. They would be constantly trying to reiterate things to you that the audience knows. There are situations where I think the audience is not very adult, but this is a situation where I think the audience can be trusted with being adults. We know this is not a good thing. But like you said, they're not judging it. It's just the movie is just presenting it to you as it is. I have a couple other reasons lined up here, but is there any other reasons why you might personally really like this movie?
Okay, I have a few. I think my top one is going to be Carl Urban, in that he really understands the character of Judge Joseph Dredd.
Yes, because he had to wear his helmet the entire time. You never see his face.
Which is, a thing in the comic books. And people might ask, why is he the only one not taking his helmet off? If you read the comics, you'd know. I'm not going to spoil it for you. But Carl Urban understood how Dredd is meant to be portrayed.
Right, because it's definitely a thing in past Hollywood films where certain actors would have to wear masks for their various scenes, and they're like, oh, but I don't want to have to wear a mask. I want the audience to see my face and know I'm in there. Much like the Sylvester Stallone movie from the mid-90s or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carl Urban was a real pro about it. and it paid off. He has my respects for doing the whole movie with the helmet on. But you only see his mouth the whole time, because that captures the essence of Dredd. Now, I was gonna say another reason for me. Okay, so one, the movie, it treats you like an adult. Two, the writing. The screenplay is just really well written. It's full of setups and payoffs. Every time I watch the movie, I notice little things about the writing, like why they have this little moment here, because that was going to come again later. It's just a very solid script that's worth studying in terms of script writing. Like, this is how you write a script. This is how you write characters. This is how you have a 3-act structure. This is where you have little things that start here that come in again later. So for me, just the writing, it's a solidly written film.
Yeah, I get that. And I guess you could kind of use that to explain my next point, in that despite being a trainee, both Judge Dredd and trainee Judge Anderson are very competent characters. What I mean by that is, it's not like they have to have constant emotional breakdowns and being reassured and all that stuff. They have a job and they're going to do it, and they're going to find any way necessary to pull that job off.
I was going to say, whenever I was thinking of ways to explain this movie to people, like, if I had to explain it, I was thinking about the whole fact that the movie starts off with saying that there was, either explicitly or implicitly says there's nuclear war. And I kept thinking, like, from the films, I know that's a comic book thing, but from the film standpoint, like, why is that even important? Why is that even an important fact that there was nuclear war? Why can't it just be like a dystopian future? Why is nuclear war mentioned at the very beginning of the movie? And then it occurred to me that, that plays into the plot, because two things are affected. It mentions that there are people who are, mutants. We don't really see many of them, I don't think. But there are people who are mutants because of the radiation. And Judge Anderson is a psychic. She can read minds, so it plays into the plot there. And then whenever Judge Dredd and Judge Anderson are trying to leave the building, they spark a nuclear bomb drill, and the building has these huge metal plates that shut down over the windows and over the doors to keep everyone inside from a potential nuclear bomb blast. And that's how they trap Judge Dredd and Anderson inside the building. So it's good writing. They brought it up at the very beginning, so that's why these things are happening.
Yeah, and like I said, you don't need to go into a lot of the backstory about why there's nuclear war and so on. There is just a nuclear war, and that's why these big tower blocks, these massive cities within skyscrapers, have bomb defenses, and you can't easily open them again. So now they're trapped. I think not only we spent a lot of time already on the judges, but another fact is that the main antagonist, Mama, is, or I'd almost say, perfectly evil. She is an unrepentant psychopath. It's done very well by the actress. They give, you can kind of infer that she has, they mention it a little bit here and there, but just from a little bit of information, you can infer that she has a tragic backstory, but it focuses on her being evil, exploiting this block, pushing these drugs, the drug slow-mo on people, executing people in horrific ways, like flaying them alive.
Well, that plays well into the writing, because the movie, I think this is another reason why I like the movie. In the writing, it's basically a story of what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, and that's essentially Judge Dredd versus her. Because once they get trapped inside the building, she goes out the intercom. She's like, anyone caught helping the judges, I'll murder you and the next generation of your family. As for the judges, run, hide, stay where you are. I don't care. I'm gonna find you and kill you. And she's definitely a harsh force to reckon with. And it's oh gosh. But Judge Dredd is the person for the job. He's seen it all. It's you trapped the wrong guy in the wrong building. You would have been better off just letting him and Anderson go, but nope. You had to pick a fight, because Judge Dredd is the person who you want to see dishing out punches to baddies in a movie.
Yeah, we've talked about originally when we started doing this that there is kind of an ambiguity to the morality of the judges and so on. But it's also the fact that he is taking down a vicious, murderous, drug-pushing crime boss.
He's essentially an anti-hero, but you like him because whereas the thing is, it's like there are always going to be jackass cops who are having a bad day and taking it out on others. That's not Dredd. I mean, he's very anal, but he worships the law. He is going to enforce the law everywhere he goes because he believes in the law, and you do need people to do that. You need people to believe in the law and enforcing the law for the right reasons. Then he's contrasted with Anderson, who is, I guess, a little more the... No, I don't know, how do I say Anderson? Anderson is, I was about to say more morally conscious, but no, she's conscious in a different way.
It's different when you realize the fact that she is a psychic. And when, for example... I'm going to spoil a bit of the movie, sorry, but it is a very good example where she finds the technician that is working for Mama and reads his mind and lets him go.
Yes. The thing is, she can essentially see the spiritual side of people, so to speak. She can see the person's like spiritual, moral side when she reads their minds. Not literally, but figuratively, that's what's going on. So she can see a situation and be like, okay, criminal, victim of the system. And I'm glad you brought up that moment because that whole scene is really, 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 really good. Because okay, let's reiterate this. You could not make this movie today. There's all kinds of things. Like, for example, Judge Dredd is the leader. He is talking down to Anderson the whole time. He's calling her a rookie. He's not being more condescending than he has to be, but he is, telling her what to do. Obviously, today they would have to write that out. But so that scene where they break into the room, there's this hacker character played by Domhnall Gleeson. I didn't realize that was Domhnall Gleeson until recently. And he's basically been having to do all this stuff for the villain under like threat of being, killed every day if he doesn't do it. And that's when she's like, she reads his mind, gets like some code information from him. He's like, all right, get out of here. And then Judge Dredd's like, you just let a perp walk, mind explaining yourself? And that's the first time where she finally like talks up to him, talks back to him, and explains herself. She's like, look, I knew I was always going to have to fail it once I lost my gun, but that guy was a victim, not a perp. Letting him go might be the only good thing I've actually gotten done today. So once again, a moment of grace in the bleakest of times. But it's that whole moment, that whole scene, that the writing and acting is perfect in that scene. Today, she would have to kick Judge Dredd in the balls or something, or hit him or something, or have like a really obvious put him back in his place moment. It wasn't like that. It was just, she was just straight with Dredd finally, and that was the moment where she finally earned his respect. Just perfect writing. Pardon me for going off on that.
I think you could write this today. Again, it would need a very dedicated director who wouldn't change things based on the current zeitgeist. But it's the fact that being a judge is an insanely harsh job, which you are most likely going to die on the job. And you need people who are going to be incredibly hard. Like, Dredd is a hard ass. And he does that not because he's a bad person, but he knows how dangerous this job is. And if you're not ready for it, which is another line in the film that comes up twice, which is a bit of great writing, you will die.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was something, every time I watch this movie, I notice something different. You're referring to the bit like near the beginning, they're about to do their first break and entry into a room.
They're doing a drug bust.
Yeah, and he's like, are you ready? And Anderson's like, yes. He goes, you don't look ready. And then when they're about to have their final showdown, she asks her if she's ready, and he's like, you look ready. You finally had a slight change there.
Because he is analyzing how Anderson is coping with the situation.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing we want to reiterate to the audience, I hate using modern day buzz terms, but the movie's not woke, okay? I think that the how would I say it, the diminishing returns from movies, or when movies started to go bad, was between the years 2011 and 2015. After 2015, it was like sifting for gems in the garbage, I guess, with movies. Dredd 2012 was not affected by this. It was one of the last great films to miss out on being modernized for modern audiences, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here saying it could never happen when I know very well it could happen. But we were lucky enough that it didn't. And despite the the stylistic changes and so on, which I understand, if you read the Dredd comic, it's kind of goofy in places, and they wanted to make it a bit more realistic, a bit more gritty, which is fine. It could have come out very badly, and it didn't, and I'm very happy for that.
Yeah, I'll just say my last thing in terms of reasons why I like this movie is also I do think the movie has effective morality, because I'm probably repeating myself a bit, but let me just it bears repeating. It's a grim, dark future with this repressive, as you said near the beginning, like fascist police. I think that actually gives fascists a bad name. I don't even think fascists have a police force like this, but sure. The point is, you have this judge, jury, and executioner police force called judges, and it's like this shouldn't be allowed, but it is. But it's all about it's still a story about morality in the darkest of times, mostly shown through Judge Anderson, but also Dredd.
Well, Dredd, talking about the morality of this, Judge Anderson is very much the soft touch, even though she is still a judge and she still kills people. She understands that you can be a victim of the system that forces you into a position that is not necessarily your fault, so your level of culpability is lowered. Well, on the other hand, Dredd is so down the line that he will not take into account any sort of mitigating factors. If you commit a crime, that's all he cares about. But his mentality is that is necessary because of how chaotic society is. You need this brutalist law enforcement to have an oasis of safety and calm and peace and order within this post-apocalyptic society. So his motivations are admirable. It's the execution, pardon the wording, of those motivations that are a little bit questionable.
Yeah, I know you and I have talked about before our favorite moments and things. We probably don't have to talk about all that again, because I want to leave some stuff for the audience to actually enjoy, people who have not seen this movie. But yeah, Judge Dredd's character is awesome. He's not the hero we need, but the one we deserve, maybe. But yes, absolutely. For me, this film, like I said, I've watched this film so many times. And yeah, there's just so much detail to notice, so many good things. It's a crime we never got a sequel. But then again, maybe we should be happy there's no sequels. Maybe we should just let the legend grow, that there was only this one perfect film.
Well, to cut in, there was actually going to be, it's debatable if it's still happening, but there was going to be a series that followed on from the film, but that's when COVID hit.
They keep talking about doing a Dredd revival of some kind, but it never quite happens. I was just going to say, so let's talk a little more about the comic. I know very little about the comic. From what I remember researching, I just remember there's various villains, and Dredd has to fight some guys called the Death Judges, who come from an alternate universe. And I really want the Dark Judges, and I really wanted to see that put to film.
Everyone does. Every fan of Judge, because the Judge Death, who is the main antagonist of that, the Judge Death saga in Judge Dredd is one of the more well-loved story arcs, and it's repeated all the way through, and even includes Judge Anderson and other notable characters within it. But it's probably not the entry point for people getting into Dredd, because you have like this big post-apocalyptic world, and then suddenly you're introducing supernatural things to it. And that can be a bit jarring if you don't have that initial foundation of the more mundane.
Right. I got the idea that the movie was kind of trying to skirt around some of the more cartoonish, nuttier things like that. But I would like to see them try to introduce some of that stuff. So in the comic book, though, is Judge Dredd like the hero? What is he?
This is difficult because this is a very, very long running comic and it's hard to work out what to include. Judge Dredd is a clone. He is one of the only two at the time successful clones, him and Rico, his clone brother, who were created as a test to fill in for the woeful lack of law enforcement. Rico eventually becomes corrupted and bad, while Dredd remains this, for a long time, pillar of the system that he was created to enforce. But over time, over like his decades and decades, because of course it's the future and they have ways to extend lifespans, he becomes more and more disillusioned with the fact that he keeps fighting against this tide that is not changing. So he becomes more sympathetic over the decades.
Okay, that's a fun information to have there. Is it true that in the comic that obesity is illegal?
Oh, but that was there was a thing in the comics once called the Fat Control Law. There are these people in the comic called fatties, and they are incredibly super morbidly obese to the point where they have things called belly wheels, which are literally like unicycles that they have to balance their enormous gut on. Now, in a certain point in the comics, there was an issue with food, so rationing was enforced, and these fatties were literally locked in their rooms and forced to diet to get down to a certain weight. Because they were breaking the law by raiding food stores. But eventually the food issue was corrected, and being this incredibly hyper morbidly obese no longer became a crime.
So why do you like the comic? Why does the comic speak to you? Because you're a longtime fan of the comic. What exactly about it? Just the character? Do you like the idea of the oppressive authoritarian force being portrayed in some kind of positive light? What is it?
It's the world building and absurdity. I've often, not maybe to you, but to other fans, sort of equated it to if you took the humor of Monty Python and put it into a fascist autocracy. Because there are incredibly dumb things in the comic that are portrayed as a matter of fact and interesting. Like, there are things like the Burger Wars, where all the fast food restaurants literally have a war between each other until one remains on top. And I'm not talking about like an economic war, I'm talking about literally having private armies fight until there's only one fast food restaurant that still exists. Or you have like cults, you have weird mutant stories, you have Alien Town, you have all these other colonies out in space that Earth just can't reach anymore, and all these strange other things that exist. It's this just absurdity that is portrayed completely straight-faced.
I think the appeal it has to me is I know that, I mean, not that I read the comic, but the idea of the comic and what's represented in the movie is the idea of like, yes, I heard someone once describe that they wish they could watch like a Star Wars film that was from the standpoint of the Empire. And what if you had that, but had it be about the Empire maybe having to do vaguely good things to still establish like law and order? Because even an evil empire has to establish law and order and take care of its citizens. So I think that's kind of the idea that I like about Judge Dredd, like it's trying to go in that direction or try to describe that situation, show that kind of perspective. As I say, showing that grace can exist even in terrible times.
I said it maybe once or twice during this thing, but it's always difficult to explain how much to include from the comic. It's just an interesting thing watching this society that was imposed because of an utter emergency. Essentially, there was a corrupt US president that started a nuclear war with the rest of the world under the wrong impression that America's nuclear defense systems would totally protect them, and it didn't. It only protected like the East Coast, the West Coast, and Texas. Everything else was annihilated. And the judges took power from the president as an emergency measure, and then society just never changed after that. Nothing ever changed. no democracy, no single ruler. It became essentially a kyriarchy, which is the term for a society that runs off the system of law rather than any democratically elected ruler or inherited ruler like a monarchy. So it's a system that seems just completely stuck that no one can change. And in the comics, even Dredd has tried to change the system and completely failed.
Is it true that Dredd's sense of morality moves like a glacier?
It does. It changes, but slowly. He's more become disenfranchised, not with the idea of maintaining law and order, but disenfranchised that humanity will ever have a competent system.
So a couple of things. Going back to the movie a bit, I guess the filmmaker, I forget who it was, someone described while researching the movie that Judge Dredd's sense of morality moves like a glacier. So if you watch the movie, like, he changes like only a tiny little bit by the end. He's still the same person, but he's changed it's a tiny little bit, and there's like a little tiny inference that he has changed a bit. In terms of things, like, I think you said you noticed a lot more things in the movie that are subtle references to the comic. There are two things that occurred to me. One, like, his famous line is to say, "I am the law," like from the comic book, right?
Yeah.
And that is in the movie, but it's very subtle. They're not over the top with it. You know, he's speaking on the intercom and he's like, "Mama's not the law. I'm the law." It's like the one time he like drops that particular line, I think. And there's also a bit when, I don't want to spoil the moment that he's saying something, and then there's the other person who's like, the Judge Dredd is actually saying whatever. And that's the only inference that Judge Dredd is like a bit famous. He's a bit well known. And so those were like two of the most like subtle connections to the bigger world of the comic. Specifically the second thing I mentioned with the guy referring to Judge Dredd as like the Judge Dredd. Were there more things in the movie that you picked up on that were like bigger things connected to the comic?
Little things here and there. For example, there is a one shot where he's giving the "I am the law" speech, where there is a incredibly obese person sitting in their apartment, and like, oh, that's a fatty.
Right.
Or the lawmasters, the cycles they ride, or the guns they use, the lawgivers.
Oh yes, the lawgivers. Those things are so cool.
Or how Judge Anderson doesn't wear a helmet.
Right. Is it true that if you don't use a lawgiver that you are registered to, it'll explode?
Yes.
Because that was a small thing from the Sylvester Stallone movie. They just say like, "Oh yeah, it won't work" or something. They never actually show what happens when someone gets their hands on the wrong gun.
Oh, they did in the Stallone movie. It's one scene.
I don't remember. It's been so long since I saw that one.
Yes, they're DNA coded, so no one can use a lawgiver because they are very powerful guns. Despite the fact that the system is very oppressive and so on, it doesn't want its judges to become corrupt. It wants to hold judges to a higher standard. So every bullet that's fired from the gun is tracked, every use of their equipment is monitored, and so on. They want to hold judges to a higher standard because they have to be. I know that's contradictory because there are corrupt judges in the world of Judge Dredd, but it is very difficult to be a corrupt judge.
Is this a family film?
No.
It must be said, this is a very, very graphic movie.
Yeah, no, this is not a family film. There are inferences of sexual assault, mutilation, graphic violence, obscene language, blatant drug use. It's definitely a film for adults.
Exploding heads.
It is graphic.
But I think it's all it all works. There's no moment where I'm like, this is going too unnecessarily over the top for this moment. Like it all works.
It's not gratuitous, but it is brutal.
Yeah, when it gets gratuitous, that's when you're like taken out of the film because you're like, that was completely unnecessary. Which I'm sure some people would argue that all the graphic violence and stuff is unnecessary. But for a film of this caliber, where it's like putting you in the world, expect this kind of thing, it all works. There's no graphic moment that took me out of it. Yeah, we didn't even talk about the slow-mo drug, but I guess we don't even have to. Like, We don't have to talk anymore. I love this movie. This is a great film. At some point, everyone should see this movie. It will make you a better and stronger person to see this film. It's great art, top of its class. We should be so lucky that we live in an age where we get movies like this. Well, we should be so lucky that in spite of our age, we were still allowed to have this film.
It's just a crying shame it wasn't more popular.
That too. It did grow an audience, through time, through word of mouth. I definitely signed that little online petition for get a Judge Dredd 2 made. Did you ever sign that?
No, because it would now be done by Disney, because Disney owns the rights to Rebellion comics. I'm not sure if they still do, but at the time they did.
Back in 2013, 2014?
Yeah, around about the mid 20-teens ish, Disney acquired Rebellion as one of their things. They seem to have ignored the franchise, which is a good thing considering what Disney have done to their other franchises. But I think it would have been particularly bad if they did a sequel.
So we don't even want to see a sequel anymore, right? We're just nope, let's just leave things as is. Let the legend grow.
I think in terms of popularity, Dredd is currently and will for a long while be a cult classic.
It's a cult classic, but I think by now it's actually gone beyond cult status. Everybody go give yourself some time to watch this film. And then watch it again and again and see what you notice on repeated viewings.
I mean, hey, if you like the film, the Judge Dredd comics are now in collector's formats. So if you want to go further into it, they're available now.
Yeah. Anything else beyond that? Because I think I've said everything that I've come to say.
I don't think so. I could honestly go on for a lot longer about the Judge Dredd and 2000 AD and all the connected universes within it, Strontium Dog, Rogue Trooper, and so on. But we would be here far too long.
Great. Well, let's just stop while the going's good, I guess. That is all. That is all we have. You have a good night, audience.